in this video, I'm going to be showing you exactly how to build a customer FAQ support agent with custom function and knowledge base in Voiceflow. It will answer every question you have about, well, KFC, and it might have some surprise twists that you might not have seen in a typical support agent.
But before we begin this video, my name is Edwin. I'm the founder of Legacy AI, alongside my friend Champion here. That's his real name, by the way. And together we offer voice-based and text-based AI solutions like the one you're seeing in this video to other businesses to help them save hours and hours of time and thousands of dollars spent on manual service tasks such as appointment scheduling, CRM integration, lead generation, etc. And if you're a business owner and you're interested to see how these AI solutions can help transform your business and improve your bottom line, follow the link in the description to book a free consultation call with us today. Anyway, back to the video.
Okay, so let's jump straight to it. So let's talk about what we're actually building today. So as I mentioned, we'll be building a customer FAQ assistant that will answer any questions that customers might have about, well, KFC in our case. And it will draw on something called knowledge base, using something called custom functions in Voiceflow. If you're not familiar with those terms, don't worry about it. I will cover those in detail, and I'm going to build it step by step with you together to make sure that you actually understand what's going on. And the plot twist I actually mentioned was, well, one, we're trying to build some sort of an upsell on the discounts and offers that are available to the users. So maybe there's some sort of discounts going on with the chicken wings, or like there's a special deal with some sort of chicken deals in KFC that when you order some sort of chicken, then there's some sort of discounts going on. And another twist is that it's trying to encourage qualified leads to sign up for a newsletter. So in our case, it will be maybe people who are interested in knowing more about like weekly deals in KFC. They can sign up to the KFC newsletter. And another case is that by signing them up to newsletter, we're also doing something called lead capture. And if you're not familiar with what that means, or if you want a detailed video on what lead capture is, I've done 1 hour tutorial somewhere here, link in the description as well, so you can go watch that complete tutorial for beginners, step by step. Now, where's the value in this? Well, the value in this build is that first of all, the obvious thing is it saves time and human resources with a human team in answering the questions that the customers might have about the company. And another obvious benefit is that it's kind of scalable, right? Because it's able to answer 1,000 questions at the same time without increasing proportionate cost. Because if we're talking about human team that are actually answering customer questions, well, we need 1,000 people to answer 1,000 questions, right? But with this AI system, we just need one system to answer, and basically an infinite number of questions, a near infinite number of questions. And another point that I do want to mention is that it actually increases the average order value. And what I meant by that is if a customer were to order a specific, let's say, meal in KFC, in a human agent case, the salesperson might not necessarily, be able to actually tell you about all the discounts and promotions. They might not remember it. Or, if you're someone who's picking up a phone call in a restaurant, or in this case KFC, they will just take your order and that's it, right, usually. And they won't actually give you both a further step to actually try to upsell you or let the customer know, hey, there's a special discount, special package about a specific deal. And another thing about this build is that we're also trying to do lead capture. And if we're able to get the customer's name and their emails, and we can sign them up on the newsletter, and by doing this lead capture we can actually increase our potential sales. So this is kind of like the value behind the build. Obviously this is a very basic and simple build, but one can easily extend it to a more sophisticated system for an actual business. Now let's jump straight to the build. Okay, so we're in Voiceflow at the moment, and let's start actually building this out. So obviously we want our first message to be like a greeting to the user, like, hi, welcome to KFC, all right? So let's just type it. Hi, welcome to KFC. How can I help you today? Now you should be familiar with the basics of Voiceflow already. So in our last video about the lead capture tutorial, I also go through very briefly about the basic blocks in Voiceflow. So right now we just want to capture the user's response, and we just want a capture node. So we want to capture user's reply to a variable called last utterance. Right, very straightforward. And now this is where the fun part begins. And now we need something called knowledge base. Now if we go to Voiceflow, if you go back to agent and click knowledge, we can add a data source to Voiceflow. And in this case, we're trying to use KFC. So as you can see here, the reason why we're using global.kfc.com is because for some reason kfc.co.uk is not formatted properly, and so I cannot actually import the data into Voiceflow, and you'll understand what I meant by second. So we want to add something called sitemap. So a sitemap is basically just a collection of a website's URLs. So for example, for kfc.co.uk, if we just type literally kfc.co.uk sitemap.xml, it will give you a list of these kind of URLs, a collection of URLs of KFC. But I have tried to import it into Voiceflow. Unfortunately, it did say there's no URLs to be found, most likely because of the .co.uk. But if anyone of you know why this happened, let me know in the comments. But for now, let's just use the global kfc.com.sitemap.xml and ignore those two. The refresh rate is basically how often the data source will sync. Well, in real life, we probably want it to be weekly, right? And then we just click continue. Now you can see that there's 421 URLs, unfortunately, because I'm in a new account. So in this account, I actually don't have a subscription. So there's a limit of 200 URLs to be added. So I need to basically delete some of them. Now we're just waiting for all of the URLs to be loaded. Okay, so you can see the status here, kind of refreshing, kind of importing it into Voiceflow. So let's just wait till it's finished basically importing. Okay, now you can see all the status is a tick, so all the URLs have been successfully added as a data source in the knowledge base in Voiceflow. Now, back to the build, back to the workflow. There are two ways that we can actually do this. The first one is actually if you go to response AI and you drag it here, and then you have a data source knowledge base where it directly query from the knowledge base in Voiceflow, which we already imported. But we're not actually going to do it this way. The reason because if we use built-in knowledge base within Voiceflow, it actually doesn't show you where the source comes from. So when you ask a question, let's say, what's KFC? It's going to give you an answer, but it's not going to show you where the link of the source. And we want to kind of show the users where the answer comes from, right? So it's not actually just made up by the AI, but it's actually being, retrieved from the knowledge base which URLs are being pulled by the AI. So we're actually going to do an API request to the Voiceflow documentation, which I'm going to be showing you. So let's just drag the API call first. Now, if we go to Voiceflow documentation, which is here within Query API, I'm going to copy and paste the link in the description, by the way, so you know exactly where to go. Now, if you just go to here, this should look familiar from the last video about lead capture. I showed you how to do API requests. Now, this will be a post API request, right? Because you are kind of requesting information from the knowledge base in Voiceflow. So literally all you do is just change from get to post. And for the request URLs, you would just need to copy and paste this link here. Now for the headers, now you should be familiar with this, which is literally just copy and paste. Well, the things that set headers, and you have authorization, and the value would be the unique API key, right? So I'm just going to copy and paste this key, and copy paste here. And for the second header, I am going to be copying accept, paste it here, and the value would be JSON, right? And the last header will literally be this content type and application JSON. Okay, now let me just move myself here in the body, which is raw, and we just basically copy and paste everything that we have in this curly bracket, and we can just paste it. Just paste it here. Now I want to talk about something called chunk, because you might see this chunk limit too, and you might not know what this is. If you haven't done anything, maybe you're not familiar with LLM related, so I'm going to be explaining what this is. So to explain this, let's go back to knowledge base, and within the knowledge base, just click on any one of these URLs, and you can see here it said chunks. So what chunks actually are is that when the large language model tries to basically pull data from the knowledge base, it actually doesn't pull the entire information in one single block. If you think of chunks as basically pieces of information, it basically breaks down the information in the knowledge base into different, chunks, and it's basically trying to see which chunks are most related to the question the user is asking, and the most related chunk will be pulled to kind of assist the AI to respond to the user. I hope that makes sense. So in this case, this will be the first chunk from here, the first text box, and the second text box will be the second chunk, etc. So chunk limit 2 will be asking the AI to kind of find the 2 most appropriate chunks to respond to the users, right? I hope that makes sense now. And if we go back to workflow, right? Now we're doing this post API request. Now, this is just system prompt, which you should already know what this is. This is basically how the user should, how the AI should think, and everything sounds good. Now, the question, instead of saying hello, we kind of know what the question is, right? We save that as a variable, which is last utterance, right? So I'm just gonna type that in because we say that as a variable, right? And let's actually just save this variable last utterance into a variable called question, simply because in here we can see that question is last utterance, right? So we just, to make life easier, let's just use a set node. So we can just literally drag it on top of here and connect those blocks, and we can set a value prompt, and we can set question. Let's create a variable called question, right? Question to last utterance, right? And it's going to do this API request. Now, if we just test it right now, last utterance is, let's say, what's KFC, and click generate. Now you can see this is basically what the AI gives us back from the knowledge base. So you can see output KFC is a fast food restaurant chain. This will be the output basically given back to the user, right? That's asking the questions. And you can see here chunks. You have basically the first chunk, which is the first curly bracket, which contains the first chunk, and it tells you the score, which is basically the higher the score, the more associated this chunk is with the user's question. So basically, the AI basically rank the score from the highest to the lowest, and because we set chunk limit to be 2, it's going to pull out the 2 most associated chunks to the user's questions, essentially. And you can see here, source, it basically tells you which URL basically the AI is pulling the information from. So we want to capture response because we want those to save as a variable that we can use later in the workflow. So what we actually going to do is in capture response, just click plus and enter variable, right? So let's call this chunk 0, which is the first chunk. By the way that we count chunks, let me just quickly show you, is that the first chunk is we're actually counting as chunk 0. That's how basically most computer scientists count this. This is just the default by computer scientists. So the first chunk is what we call chunk 0. The second chunk is what we call chunk 1. So we always count from 0 essentially. It's just tradition. Let's call it. And from here we can just say the key will be response, right? Doc chunk 0, right? Remember that's the first chunk. Dot content, right? And we're going to do the same thing for the second chunk, sorry. And it can apply to, let's call this a new variable called chunk 1, okay? And we also want to pull the URLs as well. So we're going to be entering response dot chunk 0 dot source dot URL, and let's call this variable chunk 0 URL. Well, the reason why this is true, right, is if we just go back to the test request, if you go back to this first chunk, this is chunk 0, right? So response, this is the response dot chunk 0, the first chunk, dot source, because of this tag source, dot URL, this was where the URL comes from. So it's basically going to pull out the URL of the chunk with the highest score. So the chunk, basically the chunk that's most familiar with the user's questions. Okay, so this is basically done. And now we basically ask we now have a post API request to ask the AI to pull information from the knowledge base. And now we can use a response AI, right? Because we will actually want the AI to respond back. And we're just going to give it a prompt. We have the user's prompt and the system prompt. So first of all, let's change it back to for mini. And we kind of want it to be deterministic. So we lower the temperature to 0.35. And for system prompt, we just say you're an expert customer FAQ assistant. Your role is to answer every question the customer has. Always respond as concise as possible. And for the system prompt, we have last utterance and answer the question. Right, we want them to answer the question. Well, using the first chunk and the second chunk, right, which is chunk 1. And now we want to basically save, let's say, something called output. Let's just make our lives easy again to basically use the set block to kind of call what the AI responded into a variable called output. So we just say output. We should probably create a new variable, output, and expression would be last response, right? We actually don't need the curly bracket. Last response, right? So this is literally just basically last response, the last response from the AI, basically the answer to our customer's question, and save it to the variable output. That's all we did. Nothing too fancy. And from here, we also want the AI to output the source, right? So we're just gonna do a message block and just be like source chunk 0 URL, right? So now if we test this, right? Oh, sorry, we probably start from here. If we now test it, right? Today, what's KFC? Yep. Why is that? It doesn't seem to be working for the chunks 0 URL. I think I know why. Because it's a typo. It should be chunks 0, not chunks. So it should be chunks 0 here. Yep. Now that should now work. Now if we test it, I want KFC. Sorry, what's KFC? Now it gives you basically the information and the source, right? So if we just go back, this is exactly what we want. Now we're going to ask the user, okay, so after the user has asked the question, we're going to ask the user, okay, do you have any follow-up questions, right? So it's just going to be asked, does that answer your question? Does that answer your question? So if not, then we basically give them a choice. So we use basically buttons, right? It's either yes or no. So yes, and another no. Does that answer your question? Yes and no. So if it does answer your question, then we basically want to ask if they have any more questions before we end the chat, right? So I'm just gonna go here and be like, cool. Do you have any more questions? Again, we can offer them the users a choice. So we're using buttons. It's a yes or no kind of question. So add another no. So, and if the user has more questions, we're going to loop them back to basically the last utterance, right? So we're just going to add the text. We're going to add the text block. Okay, ask away, and we're gonna save the. We're basically going back to the first block where the user then would type a question, and we're gonna save their next question into last utterance, and we're going through this whole loop again until the user has no more questions, right? And cool. Do you have any questions? And if the answer is no, then well, then when we basically end chat, right? We can basically just say, great, thanks for visiting KFC, have a great day. And then we'll just end chat right here, right? And if we go back to the block where does that answer your question, this is the route that you would take if they do answer your question, right? So if it's not, then we probably need to forward the message to a team, to an actual human team, so they can review your answers, right? And the way that we do that, if you've watched the lead capture video that I've done, it's actually through, you can actually do it multiple ways. You can do this through a API request to what we call a Google Sheet. You can do it through an automation platform called make.com, but I'm not actually going to show you make.com in this video. I will definitely show you in future videos to come, but essentially make.com is an automation platform where you can integrate different platforms into one automation workflow. In our case, we'll just be doing what we've done last time, which is basically through an API request to something called Airtable, right? And the way to do that is actually very similar to the last video, so I'm not going to explain too much details. And if you want to watch the full videos, you can just use the link in the description to watch the last video. But in our case, right, then we can just basically, well, ask for their name, right? And then just be like, I will forward, well, we can start by saying, I will forward your question to our team. Right. And then just be like, what's your name, and we can capture the user's name to a variable called name, and we can do the same thing for the email, right? And then we just be like, just link it back to here, be like, thanks. What's the best email to get to you? And then we do the same thing where we capture the user's email, right? So we create a new variable called email, right? And now we have two variables essentially. And now we can remember the question the user has been saved to the variable question, right? So now we're ready to do the API request to Airtable, right? And we just need the API block. Again, it's a post API request because we're posting the data into Airtable. And if you go back to the Airtable documentation, this is the URL that we should copy. If you're confused about this, watch the lead capture video where I show you step by step with detailed explanation on how all these work. But for now, just follow along. So this is the URL request that we want, right? So we just copy and paste that. And for our headers, again, we should just copy and paste. The first one is authorization, so just copy and paste that. And for the value, it would be the bearer and then my API key. And I've got that somewhere. Okay, I've copy and paste that. And content type, will be application JSON, right? Just copy and paste that again. Now for body, we want raw, and similar to last time, we're just going to be copy and paste everything in the curly bracket, right? So paste everything in the curly bracket. Now we just need to enter the fields, which I've already created. So it'll be name, email, and inquiry, right? So it'll be name, email, should be a double quotes, and inquiry, which is question, right? Which is basically the question the user has. Right. That should be it. That should be the API request. And after it basically will save the results within this Airtable, so a human can then follow up. Now, after finished doing the API request, then it should go back to. So we should basically have a greeting message box, right? Just be like, oh, we don't need this. We can literally just put this in here and just say, I have forwarded your question to our team. Right? See, this is basically a lead capture process. And then we just basically link this back to this block, right? Cool, do you have any more questions? And it goes back to the loop, yes or no, right? And now we basically have a kind of basic FAQ system where the users can ask any questions they want, and it will keep looping until they've run out of questions. Or if the answer is not satisfactory, they can be forwarded to a human team doing a very simple lead capture process, right? That's what we've done so far. Now, one thing that we did say something about possible upsell and discount is basically whenever a customer is interested in a certain thing, we should basically tell them about the discount or promotional package that we have to try to kind of let the customer know about the discounts that we have and try to upsell them in a way. And the way to do this, in our case, a very simple case, is actually through something called intent. So let's actually right-click in Voiceflow and then add trigger. And within trigger, create an intent. So an intent is basically something that's always listening in this workflow, kind of passively in the background. And whenever a user said something that will trigger this intent, then a certain action will follow. It will make more sense once I've created it. So let's call it OG chicken. So trigger this event when the user mentioned original recipe chicken. Right. So in utterance are basically example phrases that the user will have that will cause this intent to be triggered. So let's say, what's the original recipe chicken? How is the original recipe chicken made? And if you're lazy, you can just click generate and the AI will generate 5 example phrases. Let's generate 5 more. Now it has generated enough for us to create the intent. Now, as you can see, this kind of block is just kind of always listening in the background, kind of on its own. It's kind of passive, just ignore it. And for this to work, we should listen for other triggers within the capture note for the questions the user have. And if the original recipe chicken is mentioned, then we tell the users about the promotions that we have, right? So let's say, just to let you know, we are having a New Year promotion where you will have a free hot wing every time you ordered an original recipe chicken, right? One thing that I also wanted to add is basically one thing I also did mention is basically a newsletter sign up, right? And the reason why we want kind of that newsletter sign up is basically if a customer kind of keeps on asking questions, let's say 3 questions, it kind of shows that the customer is interested or at least invested in a certain product or service, or in this case, about KFC. So they're kind of interested in this. So it's kind of a lead qualification or indication to say that, hey, this lead is very interested in what we can do. So we can try to kind of, again, upsell them in a way where we can encourage them to sign up on a newsletter to kind of get a weekly updated news, because since they have shown interest in our company, right? So in this case, we can just have a very simple counter where if the user has asked at least 3 questions, then we kind of encourage them to sign up on the KFC newsletter. Of course, this is a very simple use case. You can kind of extend it to kind of however you want, but for now, let's just do it this way. So we just use the set variable and just set counter. Let's call it counter and equals to expression. Counter equals to counter plus 1, right? So set counter to counter plus 1. So when we first begin, it will start from 0. So 0 equals 0. But then after it has gone through 1 loop, it will basically be 0 equals to 0 plus 1. So it will be 1, 2, 3. So each time a question is asked, the counter will go up by 1. I hope that makes sense. And the way that we do this is, let's do it this way. Counter to counter plus 1. And let's set up now we want an if condition. So if, let's say, counter is 3, then we basically want to encourage them to sign up on the newsletter, by the way. So we just be like, by the way, you can have updated weekly news on KFC's menu if you sign up to our newsletter. And then we just have a message on the bottom. Would you like to sign up now? And we give them a choice, yes or no. So yes, no. So if the answer is yes, then we basically want to kind of capture the user's information again, right? But we've kind of done this already. So the way that we do this is, okay. Actually, if you go back to the kind of original loop, there is actually one sort of inconvenience. It's because, remember in this loop, like every time, so let's say the user has asked a question for the first time, and they find that the AI doesn't really answer the question, then it will forward the question to our team, it will capture the name and email, right? But now it's basically, if the user kind of asks the second question and the AI kind of doesn't answer the question, then it will go through this loop again. But it kind of repeating the lead capture process because it's asking their name and email twice when it's basically the same person. So it's kind of annoying for our user. So this we can solve this edge case by basically having an if condition in the beginning, right? So basically, if, let's say, name is empty, right, or else, right? So if, does that answer your question? No. So it should go through this in this block. So if the AI doesn't answer the user question, it checks if the variable name is empty. If it is empty, that means that it basically, the AI hasn't actually captured the user's name and emails yet. So go down the route, right? The same route. If the answer is no, so name already exists, that means the user must have at least gone through this lead capture process once, right? So it would just go straight to, we can go straight to post, right? We can go straight to the post request because we already have the name, we already have the email, and the question variable will be it's already updated in here, set question to last utterance. So the question will be updated to the second question the user is asking, right? So this kind of edge case kind of reduce that annoyance on the user's behalf. Now we can do the same thing for the newsletter, because if the user has kind of provided their details once before, we don't want them to provide it again. So would you like to sign up now? Yes. And then we go through this check. Is the variable name empty? If it is, then we can capture the name and emails. If it's not, then we go straight to the post request, right? But this time, the question variable should be, let's actually do it before this app. Before this, we should actually just set the variable question. Question to basically a value which is, let's say, newsletter sign up, because remember this is not inquiry, it's not a question the user has, right? So we want to basically post this into Airtable, so as the inquiry would be newsletter sign up, so the human team can basically know that what users they should add to the newsletter. Or you can use a make.com automated workflow where whenever the inquiry here, so whenever the inquiry is newsletter sign up, it will automatically send an email to the user using the email, using a make.com automation workflow, but we're not actually going to do this now. So we're just going to assume that the human will do it. So we just set question to newsletter sign up, and we go through the check, name is empty. So if it is empty, then we go through lead capture process. But now the question variable will always be newsletter sign up, basically, right? I hope that makes sense. And if the answer is no, then we just say, no problem, right? Just be like, no problem. And we just say, when we go back to the block where, okay, do you have any more questions, essentially, right? Now, we need to link this kind of separate counter block to where the main blocks are, right? So we want the AI to kind of check this counter every time a question has been asked by the user, right? So let me just connect this main block to the counter block, right? So instead of does that answer your questions, we go straight to the counter, right? Counter block, and it will go through the entire loop, essentially. Now, it appears we have basically completed the build. So now let's actually run it and test it if it works, right? So your agent needs training. Let us train the agent. Now let's run the test. Can I help you today? What's KFC? Now it should give me both the message and the URL. We forgot to say, because it's going through the counter, and we say that if the counter is free, then sign up on the newsletter, right? If it's not, then we should link them back to. Does that answer your question, right? So let's just run it again. What's KFC? Does that answer your question? Let's say yes. Do you have any more questions? Yep, I do have another question. So let's say, what's original recipe chicken? Just to let you know, we're having a New Year promotion where we have a free hot wing every time you order. Yeah, exactly. So it triggered that intent. But one thing we forgot to do is basically link the block back to the main block that we have. So after it shows you the promotion, it should go back to the post with, it should go back to the main block, right? So it should set, again, go back to set question to last utterance, etc. So we forgot about that. So let's try this again. What's KFC? So you can see this kind of debugging process that I'm showing you, kind of like little things that you've missed out when you build the whole thing, especially when the build gets larger and larger. It's very easy to miss out on tiny things. So it's a good habit to kind of do this test and kind of debug your way through. Does that answer your question? Yes. Do you have any more questions? Yes. What's original recipe chicken? It should go through the intent and it should go through the main block. Yeah, exactly. Does that answer your question? Let's say no. I have more questions. What's your name? Ed. Well, the best email 124@gmail.com. Put your question. Cool. Do you have any more questions? Yes. I have one more question. Okay, ask away. What's the company mission, let's say? So it gives you an answer and the source. Oh, because now we've asked 3 questions, and said, by the way, you can have updated weekly news on the KFC menu if you sign up to our newsletter. Would you like to sign up now? Let's say yes. So it basically, from here, remember how we said we don't want the user to go through the entire lead capture process again? So we didn't, but we made a mistake in saying that I forwarded your question to our team. Right, so ideally we should not have that, but it's for the purposes of the logic of the build, it's fine. Ideally we should have like a separate kind of block that doesn't show this, right? And cool, do you have any more questions? Nah, I'm good. Great, thanks for visiting KFC, have a great day, right? So hopefully you can see how this whole build works. Now if you go back to Airtable, now you can see that, well, first one is, what's the original recipe chicken, right? Which is the question that we kind of tell the AI that it doesn't really answer us. And the second one is newsletter sign up, which is the automatic trigger that happens when we ask more than, well, at least 3 questions, right? And yeah, so the logic of this works. So obviously we can do some polishing, you know, like we don't want it to say, I forwarded your question to your team after we sign up to your newsletter, but you get the main logic behind this build, right? So hopefully this makes sense. You can see the value behind this. Today, we basically built a very simple customer FAQ agent to answer any questions that customer might have on KFC. And we kind of keep looping until the customer has run out of questions. And we also do a kind of upsell technique where whenever a customer has information about a specific product, in this case, original recipe chicken, we basically using intent, we kind of triggered a special promotion discount message to kind of upsell the customer, to let them know, hey, we're doing a discount on this, would you be interested in buying that, for example. And we also do a newsletter sign up by basically assuming that if the customer asks more than 3 questions, then they have kind of invested in our products and services, so it might be a good idea for them to sign up so they can get weekly news on our company menu. And we also do a very simple lead capture process when the AI doesn't actually fully answer the user's question and they need a full response from the human team. So hopefully this all makes sense to you today. And if you've got any questions at all, leave in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe if you would like more free resources or more tutorials or more interesting builds, etc. And if you're a business owner, you want something similar like this to kind of implement it in your business, let me know, and use the link in the description to book a free consultation call with me today. So guys, I hope you found it useful, and any other topics that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. Any extra builds or interesting builds you want me to cover, and I will try to do it. Anyway, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching the video. See you next time. Bye.